Well, this is my miter station, and you might be thinking that it doesn't quite look like other miter stations you've seen because there's not a lot of the bells and whistles you typically see. I don't have a fence system that goes all the way across, and really, all I have are cabinets. I've got a couple banks of drawers, some doors, and then that's just really serving as support surface for where the action happens here at the saw. Now, I don't think fences are necessary, primarily because the only fence that really matters on a miter saw is the one that comes with it. A lot of people assume that having a nice long fence is going to help with longer work pieces, and I guess in some ways it might, but I find it to be problematic because if the piece isn't dead straight, you may actually have this part of the board causing changes over here, and this is really where it matters. So I want to be nice and square near the point where I'm making the cut. Furthermore, a fence that goes right in the middle of a tabletop surface means this surface is less useful to me because there's always something in my way. Now, if you're the kind of person who takes any horizontal surface and tends to cover it with stuff, you might find the fence quite useful because it kind of prevents you from doing that. Or if you use the space behind the fence to put additional cabinetry and storage, that might be a good use for it as well. But by no means, for most woodworkers, is a fence necessary. So think long and hard about it before you actually install one. And you might be wondering about, stops. How does that work if you don't have a fence? Well, you could put a T-track right into the top surface and make your own flip stop or buy a manufactured commercial product for something like this, but this works just fine. Now you probably noticed that the saw is offset to one side. It is not centered. So I've got about 8 feet to the left of the blade and 4 feet to the right. We offset because if we put this guy in the middle, I'd have 6 feet to the left and 6 feet to the right. But my total max capacity would only be 6 feet. At least this way with an offset, I can do as much as 8 feet on one side and then a shorter amount to the other side. So offsetting, if you don't have unlimited space, is a little bit more efficient and gives you more capacity. Even though the dust collection on this saw really isn't very effective, I still have it hooked up to a dust vac that lives under here. I've got a little alcove that I use for a garbage can, and my offcuts and scraps go in there. The left cabinet has 2 doors and a bunch of slide-out trays. And on the right side, just traditional drawers with all kinds of stuff in them. So this is a guild project, and if you're really interested in all the measurements and the plans and the full set of videos, you can certainly go check that out at thewoodwhispererguild.com, or you could just enjoy this free version of the video where I give you highlights of the entire process. Let's get to it. This project requires 6 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood and 2 sheets of 1/4 inch. I'm using Russian birch for its consistency and flatness, but honestly any shop grade plywood will do. I'll start by making the cases. I cut all of my parts to rough size on the floor, and then square things up at the MFT. The rest of the cuts are at the table saw. The side pieces require notches for the toe kicks. I like cutting these at the bandsaw with a magnetic stop. I also cut notches where the stretchers will connect to the sides. Next, I'll cut rabbets and dados into the stretchers. Once all the joinery is cut, the cabinets go together pretty quickly with glue and screws. Each cabinet will receive leveling feet, which will be essential for a project like a miter station. And my shop floors are wonky, so these are going to really help a lot. The right cabinet will get 10 drawers. The drawer boxes are pretty straightforward, being made from the same plywood with rabbets, grooves, glue, and screws. The left cabinet will have shallow trays instead of deep drawers. I'll simply wrap a piece of 3/4 inch ply with additional plywood strips to make a strong and sturdy tray. The tops are just a double layup of plywood with glue and screws bringing it all together. The screw heads will be on the bottom, so we'll never see them. You just got to make sure they're not in the path of one of the T-tracks that we'll install later. I'll trim out the tops with some solid wood to protect the edges and dress it up a bit. The tops are cut to final dimension, and the strips are added with miters at the corners. Now for the hardware. Lots of full extension slides on this one. With the cabinets on their side, I use spacers for a dummy-proof installation. Now for some solid wood drawer fronts. In a previous video, I showed you how you can use screws in the handle holes to hold the drawer fronts in place. Here's another method that involves shooting a couple of brads. With the drawer fronts in place, we could then drive screws from the inside for a permanent connection, and then drill for the handles. Next up, we need to make some doors. The doors will have solid wood frames and plywood panels. I'll cut the grooves in the rails and stiles, and then use the domino for the joinery. Now to install the hinges. These are pretty standard European cup hinges, except for the fact that they are zero protrusion. That means that when the door is open, it won't get in the way of the sliding trays. Now I'll route some grooves for T-tracks in the tops. The T-tracks will allow me to connect various hold downs and stops. Next up, leveling. With a laser line on the wall, I'll make sure that all three cabinets are in the same plane, and then screw the cabinets to the wall. After applying some finish, I'll install the T-tracks. Because I might not have the same miter saw forever, I'm installing the saw section on top of movable cleats. If I ever get a different saw, it shouldn't be too hard to adjust the height. Now I need a few holes here and there for dust collection and power. And in comes the saw. For the flip stop, I cut a groove in a block and then drop in a strip of material that will ride in the T-slot. I'm actually making two stops at once here. I could then drill holes for bolts and cut the blank into two pieces. I then drill a hole all the way through the end grain and insert a piece of threaded rod. Now I can take a small piece of aluminum, drill a hole for the rod, and round over the corner so that it can rotate freely. With a lock nut on the other end and a little star knob at the top, I've got a pretty reliable flip stop. And finally, time to load up the cabinets. For the upper cabinets, I went with RTA, or ready to assemble. Sometimes when time is money, it's just better to buy things that you don't feel like making yourself. And after building the miter station as well as a whole nother set of cabinets on the other side of the shop, I was more than ready to get back to making my usual furniture, so RTA did the trick. The funny thing is the doors up top took another 6 months for me to get around to making, but I used offcuts from my recent hall tree project to make them. There are a lot of miter station styles out there, and it's important to find one that best suits your work style and storage needs. For me, a system with no fence, big work surfaces, and lots of storage fits the bill. If you want additional detail on this project, feel free to head over to the Wood Whisperer Guild and check it out. Or take a look at the video we did on quick, high-quality cabinets last year. The construction of that one is very similar to the miter station, except that we built a level platform instead of using leveling feet in order to combat the horrific slope. Thanks for watching.